Hello everyone, welcome back after so long to a reading, specifically Heaven Official's Blessing. I know it's been forever and folks thought perhaps I had forgotten or moved on to other things. I was just busy, and unfortunately other projects got in the way for a little while, and then it was like, I just had stuff going on. So, we're gonna get back to doing readings at least a couple days a week. Don't know when, we'll play it by ear. They will be on this channel because it's just easier for me to record or stream them here and then move them to the next channel. So they will still all be hosted on my secondary channel, link in description, but you'll be able to see the live streams here. Long story short, on the back end, it's easier to do it that way. So, hello, Eming, Pop Rocks, Daniel, Julie, Space 966, who may be lost, and Lobsol. Hello. It's been a minute since we read this book, so let's catch ourselves up. We were in book 2 of this series, which is the flashback to hundreds of years ago and the youth of Xie Lian. Forgive me if I'm rough on the names. I'm going to have to get back into practice of pronouncing everything correctly. Our hero protagonist, Xie Lian, who is the crown prince of Xianle, this ancient kingdom, and everybody loves him. He's great. His cousin's totally batshit. And he has 2 attendants that serve him, and we saw some of the, like, drama where, you know, there's a lot of poor people, there's a lot of struggle between the rich and the poor, and the Xie Lian kind of struggles with what it is to be good or to be a hero. Well, in the last chapter, he, at the very end, ascended, which means he became a god. He is now the divine figure that we met in the first book, and we're going to see how his very early years as a god worked out for him. Hint, they did not. Hello, Akatsuki. I did not see that. I wondered why that was coming back up on my timeline. I'll have to look that up. I'm very excited. That comes out this year, doesn't it? Oh, I want it so bad. So, Chapter 69, Fishing for Offerings. Boar meets Crown Prince. Unveil! Along with the strong-spirited call, an enormous red brocade fell to the ground. A roaring cheer exploded from the crowd of thousands. This was a golden divine statue of the Crown Prince. A sword in one hand, a flower in the other, symbolizing the power to end the world, but with a heart as gentle as a flower. The face of the statue was soft and beautiful, the brows long and elegant, lips thin and clean, slightly curved, as if smiling, affectionate but not coquettish, fierce but not heartless. It was a compassionate and handsome face. This was the 8,000th temple of the Crown Prince within the kingdom of Xianle. 3 years after Ascension, there were 8,000 temples raised in his name. Such a passionate following was unseen in history, and likely would not have any more like it in the future. The one and only. However, the 8,000th temple didn't have the most glamorous divine statue of the Crown Prince. Atop Mount Taisong, the summit where the Crown Prince resided in his youth during training was renamed the Crown Prince Summit. It was where the first Xianle Pavilion was built. Once the first divine statue of the Crown Prince was sculpted, it was also there where the Crown Prince I read the sentence wrong, where the king personally unveiled it. The divine statue of the Crown Prince was 5 meters high, its craftsmanship legendary. It was built of pure solid gold, truly an invaluable golden body. Hello, Floor. Thank you for joining us. It has been quite a bit since we've done these live, so it's probably been a while, and hopefully new folks will now be able to join in on the readings live, and we will continue doing them during the week. Within the Xianle Pavilion, devotees were endless, breaking through the threshold. The incense vessel before the pavilion was stuffed with incense, long and short, and the donation box was also much bigger than the average donation boxes in other temples, because if it wasn't built big enough, it would be full of offerings before the day was over, and those who came after wouldn't be able to donate. In the courtyard of the temple was a clear pond, also filled with coins, shimmering brightly in the water. Many of the turtles residing in the ponds didn't dare to peep their heads out anymore for all the coins that were thrown by the devotees, many bouncing off their shells. Poor turtles. No matter how many cultivators asked the people not to do so, they were fruitless. Within the massive red walls of the temple were planted plum trees, the branches tied with countless bright red ribbons of wishes, painting an impressive scenery of flowing red amidst a sea of blossoms. As for the interior of the temple, Xie Lian was seated just below his divine statue, watching over the crowd. No one could see him, but he could see and hear their chatter. How come the Temple of the Crown Prince doesn't have prostration cushions? Yeah, even the temple master said we can't prostrate. The temple's already unveiled, so why can't we? Another said, this must be your first time at the Xianle Pavilion. The Xianle Pavilions are all like this. I hear after His Royal Highness ascended, he sent dreams to many temple donors, to the temple master, telling them not to have devotees prostrate. So none of the temples of the Crown Prince have anywhere you can prostrate. Although no one could see him, Xie Lian still nodded his head. However, a few others laughed. What's the logic in that? Aren't we meant to prostrate before gods? That must have been a rumor. Xie Lian hemmed. Another added, that's right, we must kneel. Only kneeling can show our sincerity. Thus, one took the lead and knelt down, and soon after a large number of others followed suit and knelt down on the ground. Hundreds and thousands of people, squished inside and outside the great hall, started kowtowing before the divine statue, their forms rising and falling, muttering and silently praying for blessings. Xie Lian quietly hid. Never mind, we'll take it slowly. The next moment, a large wave of noise came at him from all around. Achieve a high rank! A high rank! This year I must achieve a high rank. If I obtain it, I will return my gratitude. Pray for safe passage. The girl I likes my Shishong. Please make him uglier. Please, I beg you. I won't believe I still can't give birth to a fucking chubby brat. These were all kinds of prayers. Xie Lian was getting a headache just listening, and hurriedly cast a spell blocking out the endless voices. His ears had only just quieted down when there was yelling, and a man clad in black came running out from the back of the pavilion, his hands covering his ears. He roared, "What the hell are those prayers?" The devotees also didn't sense the appearance of this man and continued kowtowing. Xie Lian breathed a sigh, patted his shoulder, and laughed. Fengshen, thanks for your hard work. Adorable. So we're seeing what Xie Lian's early times as a god are like. And obviously when he ascended, he brought his besties with him. They are not gods, but they're like secondary servants to Xie Lian. They can ascend if they do well, which obviously we see in book 1, they did ascend. We will find out how. Companion cube is correct. That is the truth. Such an exuberant Xianle pavilion, the number of prayers that Xie Lian could hear every day exceeded thousands. At first he was filled with the energy brought forth by the new position, had little care whether the matters were big or small, and worked through them personally. After a while, there really were too many prayers, so he'd split off a block of them and gave them to Feng Xin and Mu Qing. What was within his duties and what could be ignored, after filtering through the prayers, the two would pass the important matters back to him. After filtering through the prayers, Mu Qing would report back without ever a complaint. But Feng Xin, on the other hand, just couldn't understand why there were so many who'd blindly pray over petty business. Even blessings for harmonious bedchamber matters were brought to the Xianle pavilion. Xie Lian was a martial god and certainly couldn't take care of such things. This kept up and offended other heavenly officials too, blaming them for taking matters they had no control over, taking devotees they had no business to take, to which Xie Lian couldn't rebut. Feng Xin still had his hands covering his ears, even if the gesture did nothing. "Your Highness, why do you have so many female devotees?" Xie Lian shook out his sleeves and remained seated within the clouds of incense, smiling. "What's wrong with having so many female devotees? Beauties are like the clouds, pleasing to the eyes." Feng Xin dropped his face. "Not good at all. It's like those female devotees have no other prayers than wishing to look nicer, marry nicer, give birth to a nice son. Nothing of importance. Just looking at them gives me a headache." Xie Lian grinned and was about to continue when suddenly there was a commotion among the crowd. The two looked outside the hall and heard someone speak with a low voice. "Prince Xiaojing has come! Let's get out of here! Prince Xiaojing is here!" Hearing Prince Xiaojing, it was like everyone heard the devil. All dropped their faces and dispersed like birds. A moment later, it was as if a tornado blew by, and all the devotees who were in the hall escaped. Soon after, a young man dressed in lavish brocade and a cape crossed the threshold, swaggering, a glass gem lamp in his hands. Without looking at his eyes, his face resembled that of Xie Lian, but seeing the eyes, one would think him overly cocky. It was none other than Qi Rong. Qi Rong had reached the age of 17 or 18 by now. His face broadened, his disposition much more mature. He finally had an air of nobility. He entered through the doors, but didn't allow any of his attendants to come in. He held that lamp with both his hands and knelt down on the clean floors of the hall, his cape fluttering down. He raised the lamp to his forehead and solemnly prostrated. The two on top of the altar shared a look. Feng Xin smacked his lips, and Xie Lian understood the annoyance in his eyes. 3 years ago, when Xie Lian first left the royal capital to travel the world, Qi Rong was still in detention. After his return, he hadn't yet had the chance to see his little cousin before he suddenly ascended that very night in his sleep. Within those 3 years, Xie Lian had sent a number of dreams to his parents, to the Guoxi, and a few others. He sent one to Qi Rong once, admonishing him to be kind to others from then on, to keep his behavior in check and not to cause trouble. Thus, Qi Rong had been doing his utmost to build temples everywhere, offering donations and lamps for good merits. Although he worked hard, sincere to the bones, he would still stir up trouble every now and then, and it would be Feng Xin who had to go clean up after him. Because of this, Xie Lian could understand Feng Xin's annoyance. Well, at least he's trying, I guess. On the floor, Qi Rong finished paying his respects and started whining. "Cousin Crown Prince, this is the 500th lamp I've offered. I'm such a loyal little brother. When will you come see me? Even a dream is fine. Uncle and Auntie both miss you dearly, but you only ignore us. Truly high and mighty and cold." He did not notice at all that Feng Xin was right there, who was reminding Xie Lian, "Don't pay attention to him. The Heavenly Emperor has told you that unless it's a matter of importance, heavenly officials are not allowed to show themselves privately before mortals. Family must be avoided." "Don't worry, I know," Xie Lian said. Qi Rong rose to his feet holding the lamp, reached for a brush, and started writing on the lamp with his head lowered. I'm realizing now that I think lamp means like a paper lantern, you know? I was imagining like a lamp. It's probably a paper lantern and he's about to write on it, I think. That makes more sense. Xie Xie Lian and Feng Xin felt bad, so they approached to see what he was writing. Seeing that it was something normal, like pray for the country's prosperity and blessed climate and so on, and not praying for some family to be beheaded before a marketplace or something, the two breathed a sigh. Watching Qi-Rong write so carefully and properly, Xie Lian was reminded of something. When Qi-Rong first returned to the palace with his mother, there was once a group of royals and nobles who mounted Mount Taisong to pray for blessings. I wouldn't have worded it that way, that's hard to say. Mounted Mount Taisong to pray for blessings. Qi-Rong's mother was a returnee after having eloped with a lowly peasant and didn't dare to see anyone, but she always wanted blessings for her son, have him experience the world and not be stuffed inside like herself, turning into an ignorant nobody, so she begged the queen to bring Qi-Rong along. It may have been a little while, so you may not remember. Qi-Rong's mother was royal. She was like a sister to the queen or something, I think. And she eloped with a peasant. The peasant was a douchebag and beat them, I'm pretty sure, until Qi-Rong was like 4, I think, and they returned to the palace. And she, kind of feels bad and doesn't want her son to be imprisoned the way she was, but at the same time, he's kind of not been disciplined, and so he's a pretty toxic little mess of personality deficiencies. Although it was already kept fairly low-key, a royal scandal went around faster than an arrow, and there wasn't anyone in the royal capital who didn't know what happened to that mother and son. Thus, along the way, many sons of nobles purposefully left Qi-Rong out, not playing with him or talking to him. Xie Lian saw a swing set and ran over to play, and all the children of the same age ran after him, taking turns to push the crown prince on the swings, taking it as an honorable task. When Xie Lian was swung to the highest point, he subconsciously looked down and saw Qi-Rong hiding behind his mother's shadow, a head peeking out, watching him with envy. Once they reached the great martial hall, the grown-ups, having offered lights, moved to beg the Guoxi for fortunes, or for deciphering their fortunes, and conversed among themselves, leaving the children within the hall to offer up small lamps for play. It was Qi-Rong's first time meeting the queen, and he did not know she had already offered a light in his and his mother's name. He saw how beautiful the lamps were, and wanted to offer one for blessings too. He was young and didn't understand much, so he asked all around those how to write words of prayer for his mother. The children from Qi-Rong's branch of the family already detested him under the influence of their elders. They all thought that mother and son had shamed the family, so they intentionally tricked him. When Xie Lian finished writing on his lamp and put down the brush, he heard malicious giggling behind him, and when he turned his head, he saw Qi-Rong with his hand covered in ink, holding a lamp like a precious treasure, his face full of smiles, about to offer the light. Yet on that lamp the words, "Pray my mother and I pass away to the heavens, Qi-Rong," were written in ugly scribbles. That's so sad. Xie Lian broke the lamp on the spot, furious and outraged. He wasn't very old at the time, but all the noble young men and children were terrified, prostrating on the ground, afraid to speak. After containing himself, Xie Lian personally rewrote prayers on a new lamp for Qi-Rong, and no one dared play any tricks after that. Later, when they descended the mountain, Xie Lian went to swing on the swings again. This time, Qi-Rong emerged from behind the queen and pushed him. He was shorter than Xie Lian, but he pushed especially enthusiastically, still gazing at him from below, only this gaze had changed into one of worship. After that, he became Xie Lian's tail, wagging behind his cousin, Crown Prince. It must be said that Qi-Rong had once been somewhat normal, but somehow become more and more off the track along the way. However, in those 3 years, there were too many people and too many matters for Xie Lian to take care of, and he had no time for relations of old. He certainly didn't know whether Qi-Rong had matured. While he was still reminiscing, Qi-Rong had already offered his lamp and was getting ready to leave the hall. Unexpectedly, as he backed away, he bumped into another. Qi-Rong staggered and whipped around and started cussing without even seeing who it was. "What the hell? Are you blind or something, or did you die on the spot forgetting to move?" The moment he opened his mouth, Xie Lian and Feng Xin both covered their faces, thinking, "He hasn't changed at all. He's still the same." Maybe it was because he'd lived with his father until he was 5, and couldn't help but be influenced by the rowdy market environment and his father's violent temper. But even after, when the queen patiently tried to educate Xie Rong, the moment he got agitated by the Guoxi's words, he'd reveal his true form. The one who bumped into Xie Rong was an unkempt youth of 24 or 5 years, carrying a simple satchel, his straw slippers so worn they were almost rimless and baseless, covered in dust. However, even though this young man was wan and sallow, his lips dried and cracking, his form slumping, his face was bright, thin but not weak, and his eyes were shining. "What is this place?" he asked. "This is the Xianle Pavilion, the Temple of the Crown Prince," Xie Rong replied. That man started mumbling. Temple of the Crown Prince? Crown Prince? So is this the palace? He saw the divine statue inside, the gold reflecting on his face, and he asked again, "Is that gold?" Seeing how glamorous the pavilion was, he had taken the temple as the royal palace. A guard approached to chase him away, and Xie Rong said, "Of course it's gold. The Temple of the Crown Prince is a temple, not the pavilion at the Imperial Palace. You don't even know where you are. Where did a barbarian like you come from?" "Then where's the palace?" the man asked. Xie Rong squinted his eyes. "Why do you ask?" The man replied in a serious tone, "I need to go to the palace and see the king. I have something to tell him." Xie Rong and the guards burst out laughing, their expressions condescending. "Where did this country bumpkin come from? You want to do what at the palace? Want to see the king? Is he someone you can just see because you want to? They probably won't even let you through the gates when you get there." The man didn't seem affected by the taunt. "I'll go try. Maybe it'll work." Xie Rong laughed. "Then go try!" Then he raised his hand and purposefully pointed in the wrong direction. "Thanks," the man said, adjusting his satchel, then turned to walk out the hall. When he reached the stone bridge, he suddenly stopped in his steps. Through the clear pond water, layers upon layers of coins seemed to be sunken below. The young man seemed to be pondering for a moment, and the next second he leapt over the bridge railing and jumped into the pond. He was agile and skilled. Once in the pond, he bent down and started fishing up bundles and bundles of coins, stuffing them into the satchel in his arms. Since they'd never seen anyone who dared rob the offerings of a god, Xie Lian and Feng Xin were both stunned. Xie Rong was also taken aback and immediately erupted in anger, rushing to the bridge and slapping at the railing, yelling, "What the fuck? What are you doing? Someone pull him out! What the actual fuck?" A number of guards immediately jumped into the water to pull the young man out, but unexpectedly he was also quite skilled, throwing punches and kicks, not letting anyone close. Xie Rong was jumping up and down in rage, and none of the cultivators in the yard could do anything. The young man fished up a bag full and heavy with coins, carried his satchel anew, and was ready to climb ashore, but accidentally stepped on moss. His feet slipped and fell back into the waters in a large splash. The guards thus took the chance to seize him, wrangling him back ashore. Xie Rong raised his leg to stomp, yelling, "You dare steal this money!" When Xie Rong raised his leg, Feng Xin was already standing on the side, catching the right moment and blocked. So it looked like Xie Rong's stomp was vicious, but it actually landed lightly. Although Xie Rong couldn't... Goodness, now I got... I read that part. Although Xie Rong couldn't see the one playing tricks, he still felt something was off, like a ghost clinging to his leg. He kicked a number of times, and it was the same feeling, making him feel rather lousy. The young man seemed to have choked on water and coughed a few times. "The money was just lying there in the pond. Why can't I use it to save people?" Xie Rong, unsatisfied by his kicks, finally stopped from irritation. "Save who? Who are you? Where'd you come from?" He only asked so he could sentence the young man to a crime and throw him into prison, but the young man still answered honestly. "My name's Lang Ying. I'm from Yong'an. We're going through a drought. There's no water. The crops won't grow, and everyone's starving because there's no income. There's water here, and food, and money. You use gold to build statue and throw coins into the water, so why can't you share some with us?" Yong'an was a large city within the kingdom of Xianle. Xie Lian rose to his feet, his expression serious. "Feng Xin, there's a drought in Yong'an? How come I didn't hear of this?" Feng Xin turned his head. I don't know. I didn't hear anything either. Let's ask Mu Qing later. Dun dun dun! Aw, thank you guys. I'm glad you enjoyed my, unhinged screaming, which is what Qirong is. But man, we're getting into it. The issues of, rich and poor, have and have-nots is getting worse, and Xie Lian is now in a position where he can help fix it, but is it gonna work? We'll find out. Chapter 70. Fallen Golden Statue, Boar Barry's Suffering Son. Call him over right this instant, Xie Lian said. Feng Xin closed the index and middle fingers of his right hand together and pressed them against his temple, connecting with Mu Qing in the spiritual communication array. On the other side, Qirong clicked his tongue. So you came out of that remote place, Yong'an? Truly barren lands produce unruly radicals. Think you can rob the gods just because you're poor? Then I won't rob, Lang Ying said. I will pay my respects and worship this god of yours right now. I will kneel and kowtow and beg him to give me money to save the lives of the people of my hometown. But will he do so? Qirong was momentarily stumped, thinking, if he said yes, this guy wouldn't actually run away with all the money like it was his, right? Thus he replied, His Highness the Crown Prince has become a god now, and gods are busy to death. Who has the time to waste with you radicals? Hearing this, Lang Ying nodded slowly. I didn't think he'd care either. It's not like we never prayed nor begged, but it didn't work at all. Those who are meant to die will still die. Xie Lian was shaken, and another cultivator shouted, You! To be so disrespectful in the halls of God! Aren't you afraid of heaven's condemnation? However, Lang Ying replied, It doesn't matter anymore. Condemn me if they must. I'm no longer afraid of not being saved, so why should I be afraid of being condemned? Qirong gave a wave, and a number of guards waiting on this side rushed forward, surrounded the young man, and started beating him down. Feng Xin was still working to soften their attacks, and it only appeared like Lang Ying was being pulverized. However, he was in a dazed state, not avoiding or evading, and only occasionally raised his hands to protect the satchel on his back. On the side, Qirong grabbed a handful of melon seeds and munched, shaking his leg. Hit him! Hit him hard in the name of this prince! Truly the very image of a mobster. Hearing him call his own title, Lang Ying shot his head up. You're a prince! Prince of what? Do you live in the palace? Can you meet the king? Qirong spat. I'm your granddaddy! You still think you can see the king, don't you? His Majesty's got a million things on his plate. He ain't got time for you. Lang Ying twisted his neck and demanded stubbornly, Why hasn't he got time for me? The gods don't have time for me, and neither does his majesty? Then who has time to hear me? Just who should I go to? Does the king know how many people have died in Yong'an? Do the people of the royal capital know? If they knew, why would they rather throw money in the water than give it to us? Qirong chuckled coldly. It's our money. We'll spend it as we will. Even if we use it like stones to skip it in the water, it's nobody's business. So why do we have to give it to you? What, you've more reason just because you're poor? Although that had logic in its own way, it was incredibly inappropriate for the time and place. Xie Lian was about to find a way to seal Qirong's mouth, when just then a black-clad youth appeared in a hurry from behind the pavilion. Your Highness sent for me. Xie Lian waved him over. Mu Qing, come over here quick. In all the prayers you've received recently, have you heard anything about the drought in Yong'an? Mu Qing was also taken aback. No, I haven't heard anything. Feng Xin blurted out in the midst of his task. How could you not? The refugees have already escaped here. His tone was overly accusatory, and Mu Qing stiffened. He replied in a hard voice. I told the truth. There really wasn't anything. Are you trying to say I'm purposefully withholding information? Well, did you receive anything yourself? I'm on duty at the Temple of the Crown Prince on odd months. You're on duty even months. If there really were people from Yong'an praying for the end of a drought, there's no reason all the drought-related prayers were sent in on odd months and you knew nothing. Feng Xin paused and realized that was certainly the case. I didn't say you did it on purpose. You think too much. Seeming like they were ready to start quarreling again, Xie Lian gestured a pause hand signal in annoyance. All right, Feng Xin didn't mean anything. Both of you, stop this instant. This poor guy. Lord, this man. Function is so bad at being social. It's just so bad. Why do you insult Muqing every time you open your mouth? I swear to God. I swear to Xie Lian. The two immediately closed their mouths and stopped fighting. At the same time, Xi Rong finally got tired of watching his subordinates beat up Lang Ying and grabbed for a small pouch to dump all the melon seeds while saying, "Drag that robbing crook to the prison and lock him up." The guards acknowledged the command. "Yes, sir!" And a number of them picked up Lang Ying. "Let's deal with the problem at hand first," Xie Lian said. "Save the man and I'll ask him about Yang Yang properly later." Muqing relaxed his expression and asked curiously, "Your Highness, what do you plan to do? You can't just casually show yourself." After Ascension, that was one of the rules Xie Lian just couldn't understand. The heavenly officials said they needed to help the common people, yet they all put on airs and positioned themselves above mortals, barring themselves from appearing beside the mortals at will, which often restricted him left, right, and center, causing much frustration. Good thing Xie Lian also had a number of ways to get around this. Without blinking, he raised his hand and pushed. The people standing just ahead noticed the shadows on the ground shaking and turning around, confused. The next moment, Xi Rong yelled in horror, "Cousin Crown Prince!" Xie Lian had pushed his own divine statue over. The sword and flower-holding, kind and beautiful golden statue swayed back and forth, then slowly toppled to the side. Xi Rong looked as if he'd just seen his own mother kick out the stool after hanging herself, his heart bursting, and he lost all mind to care for Lan Ying as he rushed desperately to grab hold of the leg of the statue, stubbornly trying to keep it upright, screaming in fright. "What are you useless trash all waiting for? Help me hold him up! Don't you let Cousin Crown Prince fall! He can't fall!" While he was terrified into distraction, Xie Lian passed by him calmly and casually and stepped out of the hall. Feng Xin and Muqing's faces both dropped to the ground. It took a moment before Feng Xin finally cried, "Your Highness, that was your own divine statue!" Something like a fallen statue was a really bad omen. It was something of a taboo. A heavenly official who'd pushes over his own statue was unheard of, a rarity in the three realms. "It's only a big chunk of gold," Xie Lian said. "If I didn't do this, their attention wouldn't shift otherwise. You two go and keep pushing down the golden statue. Don't give them a chance to leave. I'm going to meet with that man." Feng Xin and Muqing were still speechless and could only obey. They obediently stood next to the divine statue, each using but a finger to press it down. They only needed to use that bit of power, and it was enough. The ones on the other side, holding on, had to use every ounce of their strength and still could only keep the status quo, their teeth gritting. "This is indeed pure gold through and through. Such weight!" Lang Ying, who had fallen on his bottom, saw that the guards were no longer attending to him, stared at the golden shrine of the divine statue for a long while before he rose to his feet, dusted himself off, and ran away carrying his satchel. Xie Lian followed behind him. He ran for quite a distance and entered a lush and heavy forest, then looked around before sitting down under a tree to rest. Xie Lian hid behind the tree, easily cast a spell, and transformed into the form of a little white-clad cultivator. After changing, he looked himself over, making sure there was nothing amiss, and swung the whisk. It's like cultivators tend to carry like a stick with like a whisk at the end, like for hitting a horse or something. I don't know why that's their thing, but that's like the thing that they all carry. Oh my god, really? Ha! It's Xie Lian's birthday today! That's hilarious. I didn't even do that on purpose. Happy birthday, Xie Lian. After changing, he looked himself over, making sure there was nothing amiss, and swung the whisk. He was just thinking how he should appear without alarm when he saw Lang Ying squat next to a puddle by the tree, his head down and using his hands to dig at it. The young man's hands were large, and one gouge was enough to create a wide, deep dent. Mud and dust flew as he dug, looking very much like a thin, black, feral dog. Xie Lian was just wondering why he was suddenly digging holes when he saw him wipe off mud on his pants, scoop a handful of water with both hands, and bring it to his lips. Seeing this, Xie Lian couldn't hide anymore and rushed out. He stopped his hand, took out a water bottle from his charmed sleeves, and passed it to him. Lan Ying had already had a mouthful of the puddle water, his cheeks round and swallowed. He watched the little cultivator who had appeared too suddenly, but didn't think it strange and didn't reject his offer. He took the water bottle to drink, gulping down the entire contents in one go. He only uttered after he finished, "Thanks." Since he already abruptly appeared, Xie Lian stopped caring for any natural opening. Hello, what's up? I'm doing a thingy, stream thing. Where are you? Okay. I'll take care of it. Bye. Alright. My friend, where did you come from and where are you going? We came from the Bay of Lang'er in the city of Yong'an. I was going to go to the royal palace, but I've changed my mind. I'm not going anymore. Xie Lian was taken aback. We? Lang Ying nodded. We, me and my son. Xie Lian was growing even more confused, but his heart was dropping. He watched as Lang Ying removed the satchel from his back and opened it. My son. Inside the satchel he was carrying on his back was the dead body of a small child. The infant was a tiny creature, looking no more than 2 or 3 years of age. His face was yellow, cheeks sallow, and his head had a few strands of thin yellowing hairs stuck to it. There were even rashes. The little face was twisted into a strange expression, as if crying, very much miserable. The eyes were already closed, but the mouth was open, nevertheless no longer able to make a sound. Xie Lian's pupils shrank, his spirit shocked to the core, unable to speak. No wonder he'd felt this young man had a strange air about him. He couldn't describe what the strangeness was, but just that he was abnormal. The way he spoke, the way he behaved. It was like he didn't consider consequences at all, blunt and berserk without a care. But by the looks of things, what did he need to consider consequences? After showing him his son, Lang Ying wrapped his child anew and carefully stringed up the fringes. Watching how focused he was in his action, Xie Lian was miserable. It was his first time seeing the dead body of such a young infant. He asked, stammering, How did your son die?" Lang Ying adjusted the satchel on his back and replied, bemused, "How did he die? I don't know how he died. Thirsty, hungry, sick, maybe a bit of everything." He scratched his head. When I first carried him out to Yong'an, he would still cough a bit and call Dad, Dad on my back. Gradually there were no more cries, only coughing, and then there were no more coughs. I thought he'd fallen asleep. Later, when I found something to eat and wanted to wake him up, he wouldn't wake up. The child had died on the road of escape. Lang Ying shook his head. "I don't know how to take care of children. If my wife knew our son died, she'd yell at me to death." After a moment, he added, "I really wish my wife could still yell at me." What a simple, heartfelt way to just punch you in the gut. This book is so good at just, like, hitting you hard. I really wish my wife could still yell at me. Oh! His expression had been calm the entire time, like a branch off a withered tree, a pool of dead water without a trace of life or ripples. Xie Lian's throat tightened, unable to swallow. He said in a small voice, Why don't you bury him?" Lang Ying nodded. "Yeah, I wanted to pick a nice place. Here's not bad. There are trees to block the sun and water too. I'll go back after burying him. Thanks for your water." He coughed a few times and bent down again, continuing to dig with his hands. Xie Lian mumbled softly, "No, don't thank me. Don't thank me. Don't." Just then, Feng Xin and Mu Qing appeared, and were confused to see before them one digging a hole, and the other watching in a daze. Xie Lian wasn't in the mood to speak, and repeatedly muttered a few jumbled words. It was some time before Xie Lian remembered that just giving water wasn't enough. This man was returning to Yong'an. Thus his hand went back into his sleeve and rummaged around, finally finding what he was looking for, and passed it to him. "Here, take this." Lang Ying stopped and looked at what was in Xie Lian's hand closely. It was a deep red pearl, no bigger than a nail, its luster smooth and sleek, polished and brilliant, and soul-stirringly beautiful. Even if he didn't know what it was, just one look and it was obvious the little gem was invaluable. This was indeed the one remaining red coral pearl earring Xie Lian had worn during the Shengyuan heavenly ceremonial procession 3 years ago. The pearl had left a rather deep impression on Mu Qing, so the moment he saw it, his face changed. Lang Ying didn't reject it, as if any proper manners and concerns of a normal person had left him, and he reached out his hand to receive it. Thanks. He carefully tucked the pearl in his belt, then he removed the satchel on his back and gently laid it into the dug pit. Dad will come back too soon to visit you. Finished, he used his hands and solemnly pushed the earth back to cover the satchel. Xie Lian used a hand to support his forehead and closed his eyes. A moment later, the young man left in his stride. Feng Xin asked curiously, Your Highness, what did he bury here? He said Dad? He buried someone? Mu Qing was concerned with something else. Your Highness, I went and investigated earlier and figured out what happened. Yong'an has never been a wealthy place. Their temples and shrines are few in number. It seems they have a local rule where those who don't offer donations can't pray, and those who visit the Temple of the Crown Prince have always been wealthy, and the poor suffering from disasters can't even enter. What a great system! What a good idea! Love it! Xie Lian didn't respond to the report, but said in a low voice, You two, go to Yong'an and see what the situation is. I will go meet the Guoxi and ask exactly what's going on. His face had never been this dark. The two subordinates didn't dare to be negligent, and both acknowledged the command, departing an instant after. Xie Lian himself thus turned and raced towards the direction of Mount Taisong. It appeared the disaster in Yong'an could only be big and not small. But even if he couldn't hear the voices of prayer, it didn't mean those at the royal palace had no clue at all. Yeah, about to go get angry and say, Hey, what's up, dumbass? Why'd you build me 8,000 temples when my people are dying from a drought? Like, what? What? Alright, I gotta grab one of these. And read one more chapter. Chapter 71. God of Heaven interferes in mortal matters. I'm sure this will go well. Mount Taisong, the Crown Prince Summit. It was at the time of the day when visitors could no longer linger and were asked to leave the holy pavilion in droves. Sounds of chanting sutras came in waves from within the Xianle pavilion, and some thousands of cultivators were conducting their evening rituals with the four Guoxi leading the service beneath the feet of the 5-meter-high golden divine statue. Within the temple of the Crown Prince, on either side of the walls were numerous everlasting lamps in rows that hung from the ground to the ceiling. Xie Lian descended from the sky, lightly landing on the altar, and seated himself in position right before his own statue. He waved a hand. A light breeze blew from nowhere, and the countless lamps spun gently. With the swaying light, many of the cultivators looked up, voicing their awe, whispering among themselves. The Guoxi, who was composedly seated with his eyes closed, suddenly blinked them open and said, That'll be it for today. You are all dismissed. The cultivators rose to their feet and left. The other 3 deputy Guoxi couldn't see Xie Lian's form, but could guess that something had descended, so they also departed the hall, closing the doors behind them. Once those tall doors were shut, Xie Lian immediately spoke, unable to wait another second. Guoxi, did you know about the drought in Yong'an? There's been no word from Father. Did something happen at court? Or is it that he's unaware of what's happening? Heavenly officials were not allowed to secretly show themselves before mortals, but there were exceptional cases, such as Guoxi, religious ministers, or such high-level cultivators. Those who had cultivated to certain levels were representatives of heavenly officials in the mortal realm. Thus, Xie Lian could speak directly to the Guoxi. The no prostrating within the temple of the Crown Prince rule was thus dictated through the mouth of the Guoxi from Xie Lian. He had originally thought there were some exceptional circumstances that made the king unable to free himself to handle the disaster at Yong'an, or that the king had no idea that the situation had worsened to the point of massive deaths. Unexpectedly, however, the Guoxi replied, His Majesty the King is doing well, nothing major has happened, and he knows very well of what's happening in Yong'an. Xie Lian was taken aback. Then how come every time Father has visited the Royal Holy Pavilion, I've never heard him pray for Yong'an? Not even a word. Even if he didn't get along well with his father, he also knew the king was not a fatuous leader. He may have seen himself as high above others as the son of God and regarded hierarchy highly, but that didn't mean he wouldn't care for his refugees. The Guoxi replied, "This has nothing to do with His Majesty. It was I who advised that he nor the others mention Yong'an in their prayers." "Why?" Xie Lian demanded. "Because it's pointless," the Guoxi replied. Xie Lian was shocked. "What do you mean, pointless?" A moment later, his mind worked out. "Are you saying that because I'm a martial god with no control over droughts, telling me would be pointless? Did you forget that I may be a martial god, but I'm also the crown prince of Xianle? My people are in trouble. How can I sit back and do nothing?" After a pause, he continued, "The most important thing right now is to save the disaster victims and take care of them. Please speak to my father on my behalf to stop constructing any more temples. There are already too many temples of the Crown Prince in this kingdom. I don't need them. And those golden statues, they could be melted down to help fundraise for the disaster. Yong'an sits in the west. They need water. We can dig a canal, irrigate the waters from the east, water the crops, and nourish the land." As he spoke, the Guoxi only shook his head, muttering, "Too early, too early." Xie Lian didn't understand. "What's too early? Do you understand now why I said you shouldn't ascend too early?" the Guoxi said. "It's because your people haven't died out completely yet." Xie Lian's eyes widened and he shouted in outrage, "Guoxi! What are you saying? What do you mean my people haven't completely died out yet?" "You've already become a god, but you can't forget who you were as a mortal, unable to let go and differentiate between the two realms," the Guoxi replied. "You're involving yourself, but you are also powerless, and in the end it will only result in an utter mess." Xie Lian was seated upon the altar, and the Guoxi stood below. Even though it was obvious Xie Lian was the one looking down, when the Guoxi spoke, it was like he was the one above. "How can I be powerless? As long as I act, there will be results. Every small bit counts. Even if I could save but one, it's better than doing nothing. If you won't speak for me to my father, I will go seek him out myself," Xie Lian said. Xie Lian jumped to his feet, but the Guoxi grabbed at the corner of his sleeve, yelling, "Come back! Do you know why heavenly officials cannot show themselves before mortals at will? There's a reason behind that thousands of years old rule. Don't do anything foolish." Xie Lian whipped his head around. "Then what can I do? I can't do this, I can't do that. Guoxi, there are people dying right now in my land. Aren't gods called gods because they can save the people? If I don't appear now, then when can I appear? What would be the meaning of my ascension then?" The Guoxi held him down, sighing. Your Highness, do you know what I've seen?" Xie Lian huffed and forced himself to calm down before sitting again. "Please, enlighten me." The Guoxi stared at him. "I've seen your future, and it's pitch black." The Xie Lian looked him straight in the eyes and said, "You must have seen wrong. I only like to wear white." Damn, I love it. "I worry that not only will you be unable to save your people, they will turn around and drag you down from the divine altar," the Guoxi said. "My people aren't like that. They can clearly recognize what's right and wrong. If I can't save them, there'd be no meaning to me being on the altar anyway," Xie Lian replied. A moment later, the Guoxi sighed. "What your father has done can't be said to be right, but it can't be said to be wrong either. You said to fundraise, but it's not like your father hasn't tried. You can go see how that ended. You said to dig a canal to irrigate the waters. Go see the river for yourself as to whether it could be done." Xie Lian nodded his head. "I understand. Thank you, Guoxi." Upon leaving Mount Taisong, he headed westward and arrived at the city of Yong'an in the kingdom of Xianle. In the 20 years of his life, Xie Lian had never thought the sun to be so scorchingly deadly. The first step he made upon that earth, he could already feel how wretchedly hot and dry it was, like everything in the air had been contorted. With the blazing sun above, the land had already cracked into broken chunks of earth, horrifyingly aged. There was a deep gutter that seemed to have been a river once, but it was already drived up to the bottom, and the blackened riverbed was emitting a strange stench. He walked for a long time and didn't see a single field. Maybe there were fields once, but they weren't recognizable at this point. Xie Lian looked around as he walked, that dry and hot breeze blowing his long hair into a mess, but he was too occupied to mind it. Just then, someone suddenly called for him from behind. "Your Highness!" Xie Lian turned his head and saw two silhouettes in black approaching in a rush. It was Feng Xin and Mu Qing. Xie Lian cut straight to the heart of the subject. "Any news?" Feng Xin flapped the front of his shirt to fan himself. "Yes, in the past 2 years, the whole Western Territory has experienced a water shortage, and it finally erupted this year. Yong'an is the worst affected. The river's dried and the rain doesn't fall, so the crops won't grow. The wealthiest families are still faring all right. As long as there's money, food and water can be bought from elsewhere. However, most of the wealthy have already moved to the Eastern Territories. Those who are left are either poor or handicapped." Xie Lian knitted his brows. "The Guoxi said my father didn't just sit back and also gave command for serious disaster relief, so why is it still like this?" Mu Qing said coldly, "When funds go through the government checkpoints, each checkpoint skims off an amount until finally there's nothing left. Of course it's still this serious. Were it up to me, it would have been better not to have sent anything rather than feed those parasites." Xie Lian held his breath, forcing his anger down. "I will tell those parasites to throw every single cent they've eaten back up." However, Mu Qing reminded him, "Your Highness, did you forget? This is not within your control. Heavenly officials can't interfere in mortal matters. 3 meters of ice weren't formed by 1 day of cold. His Majesty the King is the one responsible for the mortal realm. This is his duty, and he still couldn't deal with it. You've got your hands full of countless prayers from your devotees. How can you handle this too? Mind this, mind that. In the end, you'll only bring trouble onto yourself. Besides, that only cures the symptoms, not the root cause." Feng Xin blocked out the sun with his hand. "To cure the root cause, there still needs to be water. How about your Highness ask the Guoxi to tell his Majesty to irrigate the waters from the east to the west now?" Xie Lian shook his head. "I suggested that to the Guoxi already." "What did the Guoxi say?" Feng Xin asked. Xie Lian swallowed. "More or less that it's not feasible. But now I've realized it really can't be done. To irrigate, we'll need to bore the river. However, something like boring or a canal requires mass conscription. Who knows how many years that'd take, and it'd only exhaust the people in the treasury. It won't do." Feng Xin nodded. "True enough. Distant waters can't put out nearby fires." Xie Lian hummed. "But if this can't be solved by mortal means, maybe we can try divine methods. I heard the Rainmaster has changed in recent years. The new ascended Rainmaster seems to be a reclusive person, but I'll see if I can't pay a visit and request for moving waters in the east in the form of rain." Ever since Xie Lian ascended, other than greeting Jun Wu, he had never personally paid any visits to any other heavenly officials, never tried to purposefully befriend anyone, treating all as equals within the spiritual communication array. Him taking the initiative to pay visits was a rare occasion. Mu Qing, however, objected. "No." Xie Lian turned his head. "Why not?" "Your Highness, I've investigated thoroughly. In truth, these past 2 years, it's not just Yong'an or the Western Territories experiencing a shortage of water. It's the entire kingdom of Xianle. Only the Eastern Territories are close to the sea and have surrounding lakes and ravines, so it's not as obvious and hasn't become an issue yet. But overall, the amount of water and rain have significantly decreased compared to before." Xie Lian's eyes widened as Mu Qing continued. "If we really dug a canal or used rains to move water from the east to the west, it may temporarily relieve Yong'an, but it won't save it completely. It would only be helping them hang on by a thread. At the same time, the Eastern Territories could very well fall into disaster." Xie Lian's heart squeezed. "And most of the population of Xianle, along with the busiest places, are all in the east. It's 3 more times the size than the west, especially the royal capital. If drought was to happen there..." Feng Xin immediately understood, too. The consequences would be way more serious than Yong'an. A greater number would die. Mu Qing nodded, his expression solemn. There'd be a much bigger riot born from it. Xie Lian took a deep breath. So this is what Guoxi meant when he said what father did wasn't right, but wasn't wrong either, only that he made a choice. So, Your Highness, that no one went to your temple to pray was a good thing, Mu Qing said. Leave it to His Majesty to decide what to do. Xie Lian didn't respond and turned around. The entire time they walked, everyone he saw was nothing but skin and bones. Men and children had their upper bodies bare, rows of ribs visible and clear on their torsos, and the women bore dead eyes, their faces bereft of life. No one wanted to move, they didn't have the energy to move, and everything emitted the disgusting stench of death, making one want to scream and escape this decaying earth and return to the glory of the bustling royal capital. It was a long time before he finally said, "You two stay here and assist me. Deliver as much water as you can. Let me think on this." "Fine, go and think carefully," Feng Xin said. "Just let me know what to do once you've decided." Xie Lian patted his shoulder, then turned to leave. Behind him, Mu Qing said quietly, "Your Highness, do think about this carefully. We can help 10 days, maybe 20, but not 1 or 2 years. We can save 100 lives, but not 100,000. You're a martial god, after all, not a god of water. Even if you were the god of water, you can't create water from nothing. If we can't fix the root of this problem, we can't keep going like this. This is merely an inadequate measure, like using a cup of water to douse a burning cart of firewood." I do love this. It's such a great setup for a very difficult decision to be made. But at the same time, it's kind of showing how those decisions wouldn't be so difficult if we're not for the scenario. Like, if the situation wasn't already this shitty. Xie Lian's kingdom, Xianle, is clearly built on heavy dividing lines between rich and poor. They built 8,000 temples with solid gold statues. That's ridiculous. And then, oh, well, we don't have the money and resources to help the poor people. Oh, but the rich people get to move out. You know, like, yeah, the problem is really difficult and would be hard to solve and there's no easy answer. But it would be easier to do something if your system wasn't already built out of shit. And so Xie Lian's stuck in this thing where he can't fix the shitty system. There's no easy solution to these problems, so he's gonna try and throw divine might at the problem, and that's not gonna solve it either. Really, if this was a different book and he was, you know, it would be more time to go to your dad and start working on political answers to this and fixing shit and melting down statues. But he's not going to go that way because he's not a politician. He's a martial god. He's going to throw his strength at the problem, and that's not going to make it any better. It's going to be really, really great and really fascinating and very sad. Prepare for sads. But it's such a good story. And yeah, it's gonna be great. It's not like they can drink the gold. No, but if they had, okay, so here's my understanding of this. They said this has been building for 2 years. They know this has been building for 2 years. If they had started 2 years ago to use money to build a canal or to create help programs, you know, if they dealt with the corruption of these people, you know, like, there's answers to the problem. There's political solutions that could have been done sooner. And I just feel like the author makes such a point of these 8,000 temples and the solid gold. Like, that one chapter opens with that really intense description of how rich and lavish the guy mistakes it for the palace because they're making the point that clearly this society is putting all of its money in the wrong place. Clearly this is not what they should be doing and is going to lead to all these problems. Like, they are venerating goodness and the gods without living it, you know? And Xie Lian's going to try and live that goodness. And in doing so, he's going to fail to be a very good god. Because the way that the system of religion, the organization of it is actually shit. And actually trying to be a god and help people doesn't work. It just is really fascinating how they build that in there, this double critique of the system of religion in this world and the political system, because both are basically built and are just built on falsehoods. Yeah, anyway. I could talk about this forever because I really love it, but we will continue another day. Tomorrow's Fanfic Friday. That may be all we get to. Maybe we'll play some Witcher. More than likely, I'll just do like a long Witcher stream on Saturday, because I want to get into that game and play it. I love it. Thank you for watching. This will be moved to the second channel. I've been working on moving all that shit, and hopefully that will be done eventually. Thank you all for watching. If you like what I do and you want to support it, please become a member. You get access to extra stuff, bonus content, free copies of my books, all that. Or you can go to my shop and buy my books, all that. Y'all know. One of the reasons there's not enough water in the region is to irrigate the rest. But what I'm saying is, like you could, like, get water from this. Like, there's ways to, because obviously there's places in the world right now that don't have a lot of water that kind of handle it. You know, like, there's other things. I'm saying it's not an easy solution. When the rain goes away, things are bad. People will die. But less people could have died if they hadn't spent all their money on freaking gold statues and 8,000 temples. You know, I feel like that's the point she's making, is that there are problems that are never going to be easy to solve, but also politics is shit. Anyway, it's really, really sad that he's basically trapped between reality and the fact that the world is chaos. Nature is, and that's kind of like, that's a Taoist thing. Like, you have to live with nature. We can't control nature, and things will be shitty sometimes. There will be no rain, or there will be a hurricane, or whatever. And then also people, and people are their own kind of shit. Thanks again, and I will see you all next time. Thanks to members like Daniel is here today. I think Jeff was for a bit too. Yeah, sorry these went away for so long. Just got busy with other stuff and, you know, moving things around. So we will get back to doing these. Solution in the past was people didn't live in the desert. Just don't live there. You're not wrong. There are 2021 solutions, but not 1000 BC solutions. I don't think that's true either, though, because the ancients, like, people lived in Egypt as, like, 5,000 years ago, and not even just the Nile, but also other places. Like, there's ancient solutions. I just don't know enough about, like, cities. You know, people have been living in, I mean, Mesopotamia, the world began in, like, a desert. So there's ways to do it. Ancient Jewish people, they were nomads, so, like, I'm not gonna get into, anyway. Lots of history that I think they're drawing on in really fascinating ways. Stuff is just so well written. We will come back to it maybe in a week or two. We're going to alternate and read through some other stuff that we haven't touched in a while. I put the poll on Discord. We'll see what we read next. And yeah, I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye.